Welcome everyone to STP Connect. It is Wednesday, July 14th. The self-determination program has been in existence for 2 whole weeks. And I'm sure none of you have gotten into it yet, but that's okay. We'll get you in. We'll get you in. So before we get started, everyone, one of the things that we want to do is to invite folks to select a language. Remember, if you don't pick a language and you are an English speaker, you will not be able to hear the simultaneous interpretation in English when someone is asking a question in another language. Today, so for those English speakers, go down to the bottom of your screen, click on interpretation, and please select English. We are super excited today because we are offering for the very first time a simultaneous interpretation in Korean. And we are thrilled to welcome Helen Park, who is our Korean interpreter. And I'm going to ask her right now to explain in Korean how to access the interpretation features. Go ahead, Helen. So Helen, you're going to have to go to the English channel. Okay. Please hold, everyone. She is not, we're not hearing you, Helen. You're going to need to switch to probably the English channel or no interpretation channel for us to hear you, and then unmute yourself. Helen, you are muted. So you know what, while we're waiting for you, Helen? Oh, now you are. There you are. Perfect. Go ahead. Okay. No, say it in Korean, please. Thank you, Helen. Appreciate it. Now, if I could ask Annabella to do the same in Spanish, please. Thank you, Annabella. Before we continue, I just wanted to express our great thanks to Mrs. Choi, who has donated the funding to DVU to be able to provide the Korean interpretation. So thank you so much, Mrs. Choi. All right, so let us get started, everybody. Welcome. My name is Judy Mark. I am the president of Disability Voices United. I am a parent of a 24-year-old man who receives services and is a proud self-determination participant. And we have been meeting, for those of you who are first timers to our SDP Connect, we have been meeting for almost a year now. In August, it will be a year. We started every single week, and then we kind of moved it to every other week. We might be doing every week for a little bit of time just because a lot of you are new. If you would like to go back and watch any of the SDP Connects that we have conducted in previous months, you can do that by going to our self-determination website. Go to the interchange, all one word, theinterchange.org, and choose self-determination. And you will be able to see recordings of all of our previous SDP Connects. So we've done it on virtually every single possible permutation of the self-determination program. So it is, you'll find it all there. We're going to probably start over so that we're able to take your questions. We'll probably start over probably next week or the week after and really go into the basics. We know that many of you are going to be taking the orientations that exist for the self-determination program. I believe that they're a little bit, they're slightly confusing and overly bureaucratic. I just realized I don't have my background, my special background on All In for Self-Determination. So let me put that on. You're just seeing my really messy office, which is not that great. Okay, let's do that. So let's get started. Before we get into all of the self-determination pieces, I wanted to, let me make sure our guest, yes, he's here. Greg Kramer, I just asked you to unmute. Greg Kramer is an advocate, lobbyist for Disability Rights California. We have been working really closely with Greg over the last 7-8 months, developing legislation on the self-determination program. I think he's amazing. And but he is not here to talk about self-determination. He's here to talk about a different piece of legislation that DVU strongly supports, and we need your help on this. So Greg, are you there?
I am here, Judy. Can you hear me?
Yay.
Right.
So go right ahead.
Hey, thank you so much, Judy, and for everybody welcoming me into your Zoom meeting this evening. I really appreciate it, and all the work that DVU has done with Disability Rights California this year beforehand, and I know into the future. I know that Judy is probably in the best position to give updates about the self-determination program, but you know, one other piece of legislation that we're sponsoring and closely following this year, the Senate Bill 639 by Senator Durazo. And this bill essentially would phase out the payment of subminimum wage to workers with disabilities. And so the idea of the bill would be to completely transition out of subminimum wage employment by the year 2025. And then in the meantime, develop a phase out plan, a stakeholder process to help providers transition out of subminimum wage and also have a person-centered approach in terms of making sure that this transition doesn't negatively impact the workers that are currently there. And so right now, this bill is currently in the state assembly. But there's a lot of critics to this bill. You know, there's a number of parents groups and, you know, service providers and employers and others that are, you know, comfortable with, you know, paying folks $2 an hour, even if that same job is worthy of at least $14 or $15 an hour anywhere else. And so my quick pitch is that I'm trying to get a little bit of a call to action. Anybody who's interested and passionate about this proposal and making sure that folks with disabilities get equal protection of the law, just to reach out to their assembly members. So if you all have connections with your assembly member, I urge you to reach out and support. I have a couple of flyers that I'm happy to share with the group. I'm not quite sure what the best way of going about it is, but my flyers include just a little synopsis of what the bill would do, and then just kind of a sample statement that folks could use. So whether you're calling your assembly member or you're writing them a letter, I have a very brief statement that you all could utilize, and a tool to help you find your assembly member as well. So I'll try to drop that in the chat, but I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here and happy to answer questions.
So if anyone does have a question about that, you are welcome to ask that either in the chat, or you can ask it by using the raise hand feature by going down to reactions at the bottom of your screen and clicking on raise hand. You can also lower your hand. But does anybody have any questions? Yes. Vivian, I'm sure, has a comment and not a question, since she is actually Greg's colleague at DVU. Go ahead, Vivian.
Oh, I actually have a question.
You
Thanks,
do?
Judy. I do. Hey, Greg. What is our time frame here in terms of, when and how to call? What are we looking at?
Yeah, great question, Vivian. Thank you. So I mentioned the bill's currently in the assembly. It just passed out of its most recent policy committee last week. And so the legislature is going to go on a month-long recess starting next week. And then it'll move to the appropriations committee for action. But we're trying to reach out to all of the assembly members, or at least whoever your representative may be. And so in terms of timelines, I would say making these calls or submitting this letter would be helpful within the next month or two. So I would say probably within the 4 to 6 weeks would be the most helpful to have your voices be heard. The legislature, again, will not get back to work for a solid month. And so that's still a very good time to reach out to legislative staff or get through on the phone lines, because they're just jammed right now with committee hearings and things like that. So yeah, my ask would be to try to reach out, by this time next month. Hopefully we could have a good showing of support.
Thanks so much, Greg. And, we know that we're here to talk about self-determination, but everybody needs to know that in the self-determination program, you have to be fully integrated into the community, which means that these kinds of really highly segregated programs where people are not having access to jobs in the community is sort of against everything that we believe in the self-determination movement. So this is a particular passion of mine. There is actually a question, Greg, in the chat. How does this bill impact somebody's SSI or SSDI?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's part of the phase out process that's within this bill. And so, we imagine a person-centered approach in terms of making sure that regional centers, providers, and others are aware of the federal income limits to SSI. And so, we would ensure with this bill, assuming that it passes and minimum wage is at least provided, that individuals would know, and as part of our outreach, what those income limits are and whether it makes sense for individuals to go beyond those income limits, and if they desire to. So, our goal is not to, jeopardize SSI or anything else. It's just the opportunity, if it makes more sense to, earn at least $15 an hour full time, that could be a decision at that point for the individual to determine whether they would like to proceed down that path.
Yeah, somebody was asking, saying the gig economy has opened up enormous opportunities for my son. Are these sheltered sub-minimum wage jobs even relevant any longer?
That's
great. An excellent point, Carl. Excellent point.
Yeah, slam dunk. Yeah, no, I think that they are struggling for relevance. I mean, I think just on its face, it's hard to inform people that folks are still making $2 an hour. I think that's a feature of feudalism, frankly. So how their relevance, especially in the tech era, is waning. But I think your point's well taken.
I also just want to say that this is that the nonprofit organization in the state of California that holds the most certificates to be able to provide sub-minimum wage. You have to have a certificate for each person who makes sub-minimum wage. They actually have the most certificates in the entire United States. So they're paying people, some of them less than $1 an hour, sometimes pennies an hour. And the executive director of that nonprofit makes $1.5 million a year. And his wife, the associate director, makes, oops, I gotta mute you. Jose, we can hear your Spanish. Oops. Make sure you're in the right channel.
Assigned to the right channel.
Ed, can you make
I'm
sure
on it
that,
right now. Hold on.
okay. Oh, you were in my big, like, dramatic explanation of these terrible organizations. All right, I'll just wait. I want to make sure that everybody gets Spanish. We're just on hold, everybody who's just joining us.
I could just make one note, Judy.
Jose,
Okay.
you should be able to join as a Spanish interpreter now.
Okay, good.
Hold on, I'm getting in the Spanish, I'm getting in Spanish in chat that the Spanish went out. Let me hop into the Spanish channel.
Go ahead and speak, Jose, and make sure it's working.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to add, I'm trying to make the attachment in the chat so you all have something to work with, but my network is faulty right now. So if you could just bear with me, I have some instructions and summaries that I pasted in English, and I'm just going to paste the translation into Spanish within the chat, but hope to follow up with everybody with a clean one-page document.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Greg. So I was just saying that, you know, there are these that sometimes you're going to hear that some parents are going to say, we don't want to get rid of these sub-minimum wages because it's the only job our kids are ever going to have. But you should know that these are real jobs that they're doing, and people are making money off of the work that people are doing. And in fact, some people are becoming millionaires off of the work that people are doing, making sub-minimum wage. It's not like they're sitting in the corner and twiddling their thumbs. They're actually doing real work that they should be getting paid for, paid a fair wage for. So we're not here to enrich the people who run these organizations. We're here to make sure that people with disabilities are given a fair chance for real employment. So thank you, Greg, for joining us. You're welcome to stay on. You can certainly chime in. I'm going to be talking about the HCBS spending plan for a few minutes, which is not directly related to self-determination either, unfortunately. But I felt it was important because we've talked a lot about the HCBS spending plan on SDP Connect, because the original spending plan, well, let me step back for a moment. The federal government is providing the state of California $5 billion to be able to spend one-time monies. They're giving it one time to be able to do unique things to be able to help people with developmental disabilities. The state of California, the governor, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services produced a plan that we saw about a month ago that was what I thought transformative. It had some really extraordinary ideas in there. And we at Disability Voices United profoundly supported it and made it very clear. I need to be honest with you about what happened. What happened is that the legislature really wanted to fund the $1.6 billion a year in increasing rates for service providers. And they were going to do whatever they could to get that money, including taking that money from the federal funds that were being provided one time only. And so what ended up happening is that some of that transformative money that we cared about deeply ended up getting taken out of the spending plan. And some of it in a smaller way got put into the state budget, and some of it just got eliminated completely. So the spending plan I'm going to present to you, one, it would be quite a stretch to say it's transformative. I would say it's going to produce some modest changes to our developmental disability system. And what we certainly are going to be advocating for is that there needs to be some really serious thought in the future about why we ended up in the situation we're in. And hopefully in the coming years, we will be looking at what changes should be made in the state of California. So I am going to share my screen and show you what is in there. I'm going to go through it rather quickly because it is I'm just showing you like this PDF of it. But it is it has a lot of things in it that are not related to the developmental disability system. It includes funding for the aging community, for the homeless community, and for IHSS. And so I will certainly include, I will include just the parts I think that are related to us. Okay, so let me just kind of fast forward to the parts. So what I'm going to be doing, everyone, is looking for IHSS. I'm going to be just telling you what it says, but then there's this part where it says lead departments, and when it says DDS, I'll be going over it with you. So here is $295 million that will be spent on what they call IHSS career pathways. And what that means is that people who are IHSS workers are going to be able to get specialized training. And if you take that training, then you'll receive a one-time incentive payment. For many of you, like me, who is our child's IHSS worker, we are eligible to do this as well. There's also, here's some training and stipends. A lot of this stuff the details have not been worked out, and when you're going to be getting some of this money, I feel, and I'm going to just ask Vivian to unmute herself and chime in, because I must admit that I'm going to get some of this wrong. But there is also, I believe, here it is. In here, there's IHSS care economy payments. So everyone who is an IHSS provider during a minimum of 2 months between March 2020 and March 2021 will get a one-time bonus of $500. So for those of you who are IHSS workers, you're just going to see in your next paycheck, or I don't know when this is going to come out, in the next few months, an extra $500. So that is obviously really helpful to those of us who rely on IHSS. I'm not really sure what the difference is. Do you know, Vivian, what the difference is between this $500 bonus and this $500 bonus? Because I definitely don't.
To be honest, I have not had a chance to really dive into the details of these, because again, I've been focused on the DDS proposal
me too.
for now.
Actually, me too. So I can just say this, that this seems to be for, the first one is for HCBS. This is for the general IHSS, which is what we are. This is specific for IHSS in these, in the HCBA waiver, the HIV waiver, the different waivers that you are likely to not be on, your child is likely to not be on. Okay, continuing on. These are areas for other communities. So I noticed that there's not a whole lot for us anymore in this spending plan. So here is a weird one. It's $27.5 million in funding for language access and cultural competency orientations and translations. So you all should know that that regional centers and the state of California are already required to provide all materials and all meetings in the language of the person or the family, the language that they prefer. So this to me is nothing special and nothing extra. This is already required by law. And so I don't see, honestly, this is creating any additional equity in our system, because equity is this is already being done, or it should be done. And if you who are on this meeting are Spanish speaking or Korean speaking, and you are not getting the regional center to pay for translation into your language of all materials, your IPP, and all your meetings, then the regional center is breaking the law. So this obviously helps fund it, but to me, it doesn't add anything more than what we already have. Okay, moving on to additional items. You'll see almost nothing here for the DD system. It's almost all gone. Nothing in that section. Moving on to the next section. I'm not even going to talk about this adult family homes for older adults, because it's not for the DD population specifically. This is important. We were very excited that this piece got in the original spending plan and are very happy it remained. So this is called Coordinated Family Support Service. And this is particularly important for those families who culturally feel it is not appropriate for their adult child to move out. We know for sure that whites are much more likely to have their adult child with a disability move out into their own place or into a group home. Non-white families are much less likely to do that. And yet those families, those non-white families, still need a lot of support. And it's been a real source of disparities in our system. And I apologize for my cough because I'm getting over a little cold. And so the fact that this is in there means this. To people in the self-determination program, this is very important, because if you are an adult living with your family and you need 24/7 supports, you need support all around the clock. That means that this means that you will be able to add to your budget to get support for someone to stay overnight in your home, or to provide supports for more hours in the day than is currently allowed. So this is really, really important. Enhanced community integration. So I'm going to actually talk about this one and the social recreation and camp services. So you probably heard in the last SDP Connect that we were finally, after many, many years, able to restore the funding for social and recreational programs and camp services for regional center consumers, and specifically for children ages 3 through 17, the non-medical therapies, such as social, recreation, art, dance, and music. So the key thing that we need to know is that social rec and camp, before 2009, when the funding was cut out, was provided generally in very segregated settings. It was provided, and my son went to a lot of them. It would be like the theater program just for kids with developmental disabilities, or the swim program or gymnastics program, and it was just for people with developmental disabilities. Well, we are really entering a new era now, and those programs need to be integrated with typical children or typical adults. And so, so right now there is funding. This is funding. So it's not $78.2 million a year. This is 5 years of funding that they're using, or 4 years of funding that they're using from the federal government. And what this $12.5 million does here is it goes into the general community and provides a grant program for those programs that are offered to children without disabilities and adults without disabilities, to encourage them to include our community. So what they might do is to go to a local park and recreation program and say, you should be providing your program to children with developmental disabilities. What can we do to help you? So it might mean they might need a changing table in the bathroom at the park for larger children. It might mean that they require training of their staff on how to work with children with autism or children with physical disabilities. So I'm very excited about these opportunities. So let me relate it to self-determination, since many of you are looking to adjust your budgets to include social rec and camp funding. How do you do that? The answer is we don't know yet. DDS has yet to provide the guidance to regional centers on how this is supposed to work, which is very frustrating. And so they're going to have a difficult time figuring out the dollar amounts for these things to be able to add to your budget. I know how frustrating that might be. So it is, we will keep you, we're going to certainly continue to advocate on this to make this happen as soon as possible. Moving along. So you'll see that there's not much left in here for the DD system, and that is because of this piece, the $1.2 billion that is funded for increasing rates, which is basically almost all the money that the DD system has gone to the rates. So all of those things we hoped for, those transformational things like creating an outcome-based system and creating technology so that you can measure outcomes, and remember that cool idea I told you about, which is everybody can have an app or a website where you could find you or your child's IPP like that. You could arrange for meetings all on this app. You could see reports written about your child. This is all of that money is gone, and it's been put to rate increases. Now, let me actually ask Vivian to explain how these rate increases are going to work, because the details are actually not here. They're in the budget. So are you able to unmute yourself, Vivian, or do I have to allow you? I think I have to allow you to do it. So Vivian has taken more of a deep dive on this than I have. So go ahead, Vivian.
Sure. So hi, everyone. So yes, basically, there will be rate increases that will be phased in over a period of about 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. First, what will happen is in April of next year, so pretty soon, in April of 2022, all providers will get a certain amount of rate increase. There's a total rate increase. If you think about kind of like a total, I'm just like using my hands here in my Zoom window. About 25% of the total increase will kick in April of next year, 2022, for all service providers. And that will continue on through the next fiscal year. I think in a couple years after that, there will be another increase so that providers will be getting then 50% of the total rate increase. And then a few years after that, there will be sort of what I call a phase 3, when all providers will be getting 100% of the total rate increase that the legislature has put into place. And at that time, in phase 3, one of the things that DDS will be doing is implementing a system where of the 100% that I was talking about of the total rate increase, 90% of it will just be, plain old rate increases. 10% of it will be based on something they call, I think, a performance incentive. So basically 10% of their total pay increase will be based on providers meeting some kind of measure or hitting some kind of benchmark that is yet to be determined. And that's something that will be developed, we think, over the next year or so, based on a lot of stakeholder input. So there are definitely changes in store. Technically, there are, I think, some of the rate increases will eventually be based a little bit on providers meeting certain defined outcomes. But again, it's going to be years from now, and it's just going to be 10% of the total pay increase. So it's not going to be, in my view, it's not going to be a huge transformation. But that's what I can tell you about how the new law lays out the rate increases.
Thank you, Vivian. So obviously, when you hear some of the language that a prevailing need, here it says, a prevailing need and challenge within the developmental service system is moving from a compliance-based system to an outcome-based system, which is something that we've been talking about for years. This doesn't really get us very far. And so we are quite frustrated that billions and billions of dollars are being flooded into the DD system without any accountability and with any tie towards good outcomes for people in the system. Now, how does that relate to self-determination? We are not in the traditional system. So those outcome-based pieces are actually not going to even affect us. But since 99.9% of people in regional centers are still in the traditional system, we all have to care about them too. But how does this affect us? This is going to affect us by increasing your budgets, because budgets must be created based on the traditional system. And if the services you are receiving in the traditional system have rates that are increased, it will increase your budget. So remember that the increase is not going to happen until April, the first increase, and that's only 25% of what they're supposed to be getting. There are different services that are going to get different rate increases. So if you get supported living, like my friend Howard McBroom, that is a 40% rate increase for that service. So Howard's budget over the next 5 years is going to go up a lot. For those of you who are getting independent living services, their rate is going to be very small. Their rate increase is very small. So you're not going to see a big change there. Respite, I can't remember the number, but respite is going up a lot, very substantially. So, so those of you who only really receive respite, you are going to be getting a good budget increase. So to us, this is very exciting, because outcomes in the self-determination program are measured by us. They're measured by our person-centered plans and whether we are happy with our services. So for us, we're getting it all, because we're getting an increased budget and we're getting the outcomes because we determine our outcomes. But I still remain very concerned that our system is very backward, and it's the outcomes are not being created based, the rates are not being created based on the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. So I actually think, yeah, that I believe that might be it. No, there's this little tiny thing here. So there's $6 million that has been added to create a system to change our technology. This is just planning money. So this is looking at creating these systems that we were hoping for. In the original plan, it had planning money and it had implementation money. But now it only has planning money. So this uniform fiscal system is going to create one billing system for service providers to bill through, as well as case management. So the things that we are asking for all will be in the same place, so that we are able to look at the bills that service providers send in the traditional system. That obviously we see the bills that people send in the self-determination program. This is why the self-determination program is already meeting all of these goals. But knowing that most people are in the traditional system, this is really critical. And then this is there's some planning money to create this consumer electronic records management system. This could be it could cost these two to actually implement them, could easily be well over $100 million. And so when are we going to be at a time where we're going to be able to have that money of $100 million? We feel this is a huge lost opportunity to take this one-time money and put it towards ongoing expenses for rate increases, as opposed to investing it in giant transformational change of our system and to create an outcomes-based system. To me, it's just a waste. It's very, very disappointing. And DVU, after we have time to analyze this, you should know this just became public yesterday. So once we have time to analyze this and compare it to the state budget, we are going to put out a statement talking about it, and we will certainly share that with all of you. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing that now and wanted to spend the rest of our time really going through any questions that you all may have. You can ask questions now about the presentation I just made. You can ask questions about the self-determination program and the statewide rollout, or you can ask questions about any detailed aspect of the self-determination program. You may not know anything about self-determination, and that's okay. We'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can until 6 p.m. So Ed, do you want to start going through a bunch of the questions that have lined up?
I'd love to do that. So beginning with Sheila, I have a question saying, hi, a self-determination program parent was asked to provide respite service to another self-determination participant from another home. Is this legitimate?
I am not sure I understand that question.
I'm not sure I do.
Sheila, if you could raise your hand. I don't know if you may not be in a place where you can speak, but I would love to try to get more of an explanation, because I'm not sure I understand the question. Or if anybody does understand the question, use the raise hand feature and go ahead and ask it on behalf of her, because I don't completely understand it.
So I'll bracket that off.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question from Sheila. Who is responsible for spending plan revisions where the participant or the family is seeking to move funds from one category to another? I think there's a missing word here within the next sentence. Within the limited that does not require another meeting.
So
some FMSs are asking the independent facilitator, who are not necessarily trained in spending plan adjustments.
Yeah, so I'm noticing that I'm not very centered on the screen, so I'm going to try to center. Did that help? I don't know. or maybe I made it worse. Who knows? There we go. So in the trailer bill language that was part of the budget that just passed, there was some great news related to the spending plan. The legislation, the law, now it's a law, specifically defined spending plan as it was already defined in the in previous directives of DDS. And let me I can show you exactly what it says. This was I made a little PowerPoint, or Nina, Ed and I made a very quick PowerPoint last time. And let me show you actually what it says, because I think that this is important for everyone to see. Slideshow, play from current slide, and then let me share screen. Okay. All right. So are you all just seeing a slide, Ed?
Sure am.
Okay. So this is what is in the law now. A spending plan means the plan the participant develops to use their available individual budget funds to purchase goods, services, and supports necessary to implement their IPP. The spending plan shall identify the cost of each good, service, and support that will be purchased with regional center funds. The total amount of the spending plan cannot exceed the amount of the individual budget. A copy of the spending plan shall be attached to the participant's IPP. Forgive me, but I did not see anywhere in here that use the word regional centers approve the spending plan. Did anybody else see that? Because it's not there, because that is not actually true. So if you are encountering your regional center who is saying you can't go forward because we haven't approved your spending plan, they are wrong. They are reviewing the spending plan to ensure certain pieces are part of the federal waiver or contract we have with the federal government. They are making sure that you are using generic resources first. So let's say you're looking to do speech therapy, you need to ask your insurance to pay for that, or your school district to pay for that first and get a denial. And 3, all services need to be integrated in the community. So let me stop sharing and explain to you what that looks like, because this is the way it should work. So we just submitted last month my son's spending plan for his second year in the self-determination program. And in that spending plan was a line item using a particular agency that is part of the traditional system that provides segregated services. So services just for people with developmental disabilities. We were not asking them to do that, but the regional center looked at our spending plan, reviewed it, and said, little question, called me up, or actually they just sent an email, my service coordinator, and said, you are using this service provider, how are you using them? And if we had said, oh, we're part of their day program, I think they would have come back and said, well, we really need to look at that to make sure he's actually being integrated in the community. But in fact, we said, oh no, one of the coaches from the program comes to our home, stays in the backyard with my son, and provides personal training to exercise program. And they said, okay, great, no problem. And then the spending plan got attached to my son's IPP. The IPP was signed and we moved forward. So that is the way it is supposed to work. There is not supposed to be micromanaging of spending plans. Your service coordinator should not be sitting down with you and saying, why are you spending so much in this area? Why is this costing so much? That is not their job. The term cost effective does not exist within the context of the spending plan. So please push back on this, show them that this is part of the law, and that they really need to they have only 3 areas they can look at. I just want to say one more thing. If you are having a problem with generic resources, so let's say you're asking for, you want to pay for a behavior therapist, but that behavior therapist is not providing behavioral therapy that should be paid for by an insurance company. You're maybe using someone with a background in behavioral therapy to maybe teach you to how to cook, or to teach you how to drive, or to help you build skills to have a relationship with someone. That is not behavioral therapy. That is more life coaching. That is more job, it might be social skills. So you want to make sure that when you describe each piece of your spending plan, that you are describing it in the way that if it is not truly part of generic resources, that it won't raise any questions. Okay, so that's really, really important. I hope that answered that question.
Thank you, Judy. I'm going to start going a little bit out of order here. I apologize, folks. I'm just starting to get repeated questions. And when that happens, I want to make sure that those get answered. I have several people essentially asking, hey, what's up with the person-centered plan funding for
Right.
people who are entering for the first time? Can you speak to that, Judy?
Yes, it is definitely approved. Yes, it is approved. Now, does that mean that regional centers are actually providing it for you? The answer is generally no, because I did not understand that regional centers will literally do nothing without getting a very specific directive from DDS. It is very frustrating that that is the case, even though it's part of the funding, it's in the budget. I can tell you this, that I have heard it out of the mouth of Nancy Bargeman, the director of DDS, that the funding for person-centered planning and development of spending plan, that the funding is there. I have heard it directly from her mouth. And then I spoke yesterday to the associate director of DDS, Jim Knight, and I asked him to confirm, and he said, yes, the money is there. And I said, when are you going to tell the regional centers? And he said, we've already written it. We hope to get it out soon. So what this says to me is that you should go ahead and identify the facilitator that you'd like to work with you on developing your person-centered plan and developing your spending plan. And you should get started, because remember that those independent facilitators or those planners, they're not able to bill your regional center until they're all done with their work. And so by the time they're done with the work, that directive will be out. So go ahead and get started, everybody. Just make sure their bill that the bill that they send to the regional center is dated after July 1st.
And Judy, where can people find this provision? Is it in the trailer bill language, the budget? Do we not know yet? It's
in the budget in a not very explicit way. That's the problem that I've had in trying to get this information out. There is a one line item for self-determination that's $10.2 million. And what we know made up that line item is funding $2.5 million for person-centered planning, $8 million for regional centers to hire participant choice specialists to work on the self-determination program, and then a smaller amount of money, $600,000, to develop trainings and orientations. So we know, because in the hearings that the legislature had on the budget, that those numbers were specifically stated. But when it got into the actual final budget, it just has that one line item of $10.2 million. So that's why it's really frustrating that I cannot send you to a place that actually lists it. But what I'm hoping is that in next week's SDP Connect or the week after, I can actually get someone from DDS to come on to our Zoom meeting and to tell you all directly from the horse's mouth, as they say. Oh, Jan was just asking, I just saw, do we have the ombudsperson? Yes, we do. The ombudsperson will be created for the self-determination program only. You may remember that in the HCBS spending plan, the original one, it was expanded to being for the entire system. We were super excited about that because I personally believe there shouldn't be an ombudsperson just for self-determination, since 99% of people are in the traditional system, and there are a lot of problems in the traditional system. But for now, we have one in self-determination. Now, people are already asking, how do we call them? They do not exist yet. I'm using the term they because it's going to be more than one person. It's an office of the ombudsperson. There will actually be that ombudsperson, and then that person will have probably 3 or 4 staff to help them. There will be a phone number that you can call and speak to them. There will be an email address that you can email them, but they haven't even started the process of hiring anybody yet. Remember, the budget's only 2 weeks old. So the way that DDS runs, they are the slowest thing I've ever seen. Honestly, it's probably going to be the fall before we have somebody in that position, if I had to guess. Okay, I would guess the fall. But of course, we will keep on top of it, and we will ask the new ombudsperson to come speak at one of our SDP Connects, because they really need to meet you all and hear from you. Go ahead, Ed.
Awesome. Thank you, Judy. So I have a question I have an anonymous question asking, may I work as a service provider for my brother in ILS if I am also an IHSS service provider for my brother in the self-determination program?
Yeah. I wish I had a much better answer for you. And I feel like this is something that maybe DRC needs to really challenge. But so the independent facilitator in the original statute, we wanted to make sure that they were independent, meaning they are not, that they're not providing services in the self-determination program in any other way. That's because we don't want the facilitator to do the person-centered plan and then say, oh, and by the way, you should hire me to do everything in your plan. That was the intent of the concept of the independent facilitator. However, it's been overbroad. And so what we need to do is challenge it, because they are now saying, DDS, that it also includes IHSS. Even though IHSS is not a regional center funded service, they are saying that if you're an IHSS worker, you are in the IPP, which, by the way, I don't even understand that. But I don't know, Katie, I see you here. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, or I just asked you to unmute, but I'm actually very frustrated. And I actually think this is discriminatory against low-income families.
Yeah, so, there is the intent of laws, and then there is how they are used. And the intent really was, as Judy said, that we didn't want, people being independent facilitators who could then sort of set themselves up for work, so to speak. That was really what we were trying to avoid, and particularly people who might manipulate that arrangement to their own benefit, to the detriment of a client. And so it really was intended to avoid abuse and manipulation. And I think, to me, there are very different scenarios where I'm an independent facilitator and then I convince my client to hire me to also do 5 other services for them at an exorbitant rate per hour. That to me is very different than, I'm also the IHSS worker because we know each other well, and maybe we live in a remote area where it's hard to find workers. And so, I think that there is a nuance that was intended that is missing from how it's being implemented.
I'm so sorry. I just wanted to interrupt and say, Judy, you said independent facilitator. The parent is, or excuse me, not the parent, the sibling is the instructor of ILS or wants to be the instructor of ILS.
Right.
Got it.
Right. As opposed to the independent facilitator, I believe that same rule exists. Well, maybe not.
She's asking about ILS if
Yes.
she's also an IHSS provider.
Okay, so forget everything I said. Yes, that's not a problem to be a worker, an IHSS worker and a service provider in the self-determination program. That's fine. The restriction comes with the independent facilitator, because that's really the question I've been hearing. So I'm sorry that I misinterpreted your question. So yes, it's not a problem for you to serve a client as an IHSS worker, as well as providing any other kind of service, with the exception of being an independent facilitator. So maybe we'll look at challenging that, maybe, or at least having a very serious discussion with DDS about that. Thanks, Katie.
I think we need to add more words.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, go ahead, Ed.
From the fabulous Molly Kennedy, will the HCBS budget also help desegregated employment situations go away, hopefully?
Yeah, so the funding that was in the HCBS spending plan for specifically moving people in these segregated work programs and date programs into the community, particularly with person-centered planning, that money is gone. Sadly, that money is gone. So yeah, it's not that transformative. I don't know, what's a less word than transformative? It's itty bitty change. Is that better? It's got an itty bitty change. All right, what other questions there, Ed?
Yes, they start coming and they don't stop coming, as that Shrek song says. From Teresa, do you need to take the specialized training before you receive the $500, referring to the provision for the one-time bonus in the budget?
Wait, say that again, I'm sorry.
Sure. Do you need to take the specialized training before you receive the one-time bonus of $500 if you're a service provider?
No, for IHSS.
Right.
No, you're just going to automatically get the money if you were providing services for at least 2 months between March 2020 and March 2021.
Got it. Thank you. I have from Sherry. Can a person use the social rec and camp category to go camping on the coast for a few days with a care provider?
Yep. Why not?
Cool.
You're not in a segregated place. You are getting out in the community. You're having lots of fun. Why not?
Great. Awesome. There was a little bit of dialogue between Carl and Mark in the chat pursuant to folks who are regional center consumers who also use ASL, who may be deaf or hard of hearing or just use it to communicate. And Mark asks a great question: is ASL included in the language funding mentioned earlier? I also know that there was like a specific ASL budget piece earlier, and I just, as a mainstream deaf person, would love to know what happened to that.
That's gone. That's gone. the money for, which is really astonishing because DRC has this really large lawsuit against DDS over their lack of supports for people who are deaf. Yes, ASL is part of the language differential, that if service providers are offering that service, that provider can make an additional amount of money per hour.
Okay, thank you. Pursuant to, I have an anonymous question related to social rec that I'd like to go back to before we get too far away from the topic. Can you elaborate on recreational activities? Is it paid for now by the regional center, such as art class, swimming class, dance class, and so on?
It will be soon. It not yet, because remember, as I said, it's your lesson for the day. Regional centers do nothing without specific direction from DDS. And so they are waiting to hear, how do they vendor? So vendor means to get that contract with somebody who's providing services. How do they vendor social recreational programs and camp right now? I foresee this as very, very problematic, because we want to ensure that people are integrated in their social rec programs. So they're going out and they're telling, the local parks and rec programs to include people with developmental disabilities. They're telling the YMCA, the Boy Scouts, the local karate place to include people with developmental disabilities. And then when it comes to giving them money to pay for it, if you're in the traditional system, you have to become a vendor of the regional center. And if any of you have ever tried to become a vendor of a regional center, it is a nightmare. I can tell you, because we were for the first time vendorized for our recent self-determination conference. And we have basically been paid for maybe 5% of the people who showed up. And we are still filling out paperwork and adding insurance. And I mean, it's so ridiculous, the vendorship process. It makes a lot of sense when you're a very large client or a very large provider, and let's say you're getting millions and millions of dollars a year, to go through that process with regional centers. Okay, you're willing to do it. But if you're the local karate place and you have one student that you're going to be making, a couple $100s on, there's no way that they're going to take money from a regional center. They're not filling out 30 pages, putting the regional center on their liability insurance, sexual molestation, a rider on sexual molestation. There's no way they're going to do that for a few $100. So I personally see this social rec stuff becoming a disaster in the very near future. So we're playing it out.
Thank you, Judy. And going back to clarifying again, another question that we just asked before we get too far away from it. Mark wants to know, will the state pay for ASL interpreters as they do for folks whose first language is Spanish, whose first language is Korean, and so on?
Okay, Katie, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I don't know the answer to that.
So I would argue, remember, I'm a lawyer. I would argue that under existing law, the regional center has a duty to communicate with people in their native language, and that includes ASL. So I think you have a good claim under current law, even before anything, anything in this budget bill.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Katie. I have a question from, let me try and hit a pertinent one here. From Maria, my daughter is adult and she's living with me. How do I use the SLS if I'm the one who's the caregiver for her IHSS hours?
Wait, and ask that again, please.
Sure, 1 second, I accidentally deleted it. Maria asks, my daughter is an adult who is living with me. How do I use the SLS if I am the caregiver for her IHSS hours?
Oh, it's the same way you would do it if you're not the IHSS provider and you hire an external person to be the IHSS provider. The way that supported living services works is is you look at the amount of hours over the course of the week. And if this is an individual who needs support 24 hours a day, then what you do is you know that supported living services does not cover all the hours. IHSS does not cover all the hours. Being, in a day program does not cover all the hours. So you piece it together and you figure out exactly how many supported living hours are needed based on the fact that there are already IHSS and already maybe some activities during the day. So it's a calculus that regional centers are very accustomed to helping people with. So although you should probably figure it out on your own before you walk in to an IPP, but it's really, really common.
Great. Thank you, Judy. I have a question from Elizabeth. Can we include advocacy services for IEPs in the SDP spending plan?
Yes, you can. You can include advocacy for any generic resource. So that means if you're having problems getting access to Social Security or to supplemental security income or SSI or SSDI or Department of Rehabilitation and Education, you can use your funding for advocacy. But remember that school districts, if you win, are required to pay for your advocacy services. So to me, that is not the best way to spend your limited self-determination dollars. If you are taking your school district to due process, to hearing over a request and you win, your lawyer gets paid for by the school district. So I think that is probably the better way to go, is to find the lawyer who is willing to take your case, and then they will end up getting paid back by the by the school district.
Thank you, Judy. Just a reminder, folks, we have a lot of questions. If you sent me your question once, I promise it's on the list. If you send it multiple times, it makes it difficult for me to track what I've already put on the list and what I haven't. So a question from Connie about concern regarding vendors receiving increases and those increases perhaps not trickling down to the employees who need them. Are there any provisions that the extra funding these folks will receive will trickle down to direct service providers who perhaps may need it most?
Right. So interestingly, in the and I could be slightly wrong about this, but I recall that in the regulations or in the guidance from the federal government on how the HCBS money can be spent, it very specifically says that the funding can only be used for direct support professionals. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong about that, because that's just a recollection of when I read that, but I believe that's the case. The question is this: who's going to verify that, right? Who's going to verify that? Who's going to be looking at every single service provider and ensure that people who work there are actually getting their salaries increased because of the additional 40% that supported living providers are getting? So to me, with that 40%, that means that Howard's providers, his people who come in to help him every single day, should be getting a very big raise. Maybe not the whole 40%, because some of that's got to go to insurance and healthcare and taxes, but they should be getting a pretty big raise. And so, that's certainly advocacy that we're going to need to do in the traditional system, to tell families and individuals that you should be asking your providers whether they got a raise in April. Remember, this doesn't happen till April. And they should definitely be getting at least, remember, it's not a full 40% in supported living in April, it's just 1/4 of that. So they'll be getting a 10% rate increase in April. All right, next.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Judy.
I hate that I have to answer all these things. That's why I keep calling on Katie.
I have a question from Melissa. Hi, I received my individual budget calculator and certification tool from Westside, Judy, your own regional center, for the services for social skills and floor time, adaptive skills. They're only funding 6 months of services.
Yeah.
I was told they'll add 6 months of service after a report. I was told this was from Caesar. Obviously, this does not make
Yeah.
any sense pursuant to the law. Two things. One, any ideas? Two, do we need to pay for the report to approve the social skills and floor time out of our budget?
So your amazing, I don't know if she's your facilitator or your friend, Carla Lehman, brought that up at the local advisory committee at Westside Regional Center last night. So let me try to break this down for everybody. I'll just give like an example. So you are an individual served by the regional center who receives behavioral therapy because you don't have autism and therefore insurance will not pay for it. Yet you do not believe that traditional behavioral therapy has really benefited you. So that funding goes into your budget. But you instead decide that what would really benefit you instead of traditional ABA therapy would be to have horseback riding, jump on a trampoline, have swimming, yoga, that you decide to spend that behavioral money on other kinds of things that you believe will help you calm your body or be more focused or whatever traditional behavioral therapy was supposed to be addressing, right? The problem is that regional centers are now saying that those providers that you are paying for have to produce a report telling them why behavioral therapy should continue to be offered, even though none of those providers are actually giving you behavioral therapy. So you're going to ask your horseback riding instructor to write a report on behavioral therapy? It obviously makes no sense. And so, plus you have no funding to get those reports written. So we directly asked that of Caesar at Westside Regional Center. I don't know if other regional centers are doing the same thing, but he said, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. We need to get more information from DDS, because he claimed this came from DDS. Even though I've heard nothing of the kind. I believe that and the 6 month thing really makes no sense. That really makes no sense to me. But I actually believe that it is reasonable for a regional center to ask for an annual assessment of whether a person continues to need certain services. I believe that is a reasonable request. So let me give you an example. So that person that decided that ABA therapy didn't work, and so therefore they want to do all these other cool things. And let's say all those other cool things like swimming and horseback riding really helped that person with any behavioral challenges, calmed them, got their body got more regulated. And so then when you go back, they're supposed to assess for whether that person has that same level of need, right? Remember, it's an annual assessment of need is your IPP. The problem is that then if your budget is reduced and you don't have the funds to do all those cool things that keep your body calm, then what happens? Your behaviors go up. I mean, the whole thing is like this. It's really quite, but it's the same thing, honestly, if your behaviors improve because your behavioral therapy is working for you and then they cut back your behavioral therapy and then your behaviors get worse. It's actually the same exact little crisis. But I do believe that it is part of the process of an annual IPP that there needs to be an assessment of what it is that your needs are. Sometimes those assessments would be provided by a professional, like a therapist, and sometimes those assessments are just part of your person-centered planning process.
Thank you, Judy. I have a question that I would really like answered. Could an independent facilitator represent people at fair hearings and get paid with a self-determination program budget? Regional Center of Orange County doesn't want to pay because they say in the traditional system doesn't do that, so neither should the SDP.
Okay, well, that last line is ridiculous because there's lots of things that happen in the self-determination program that's not in the traditional system. So that's like a completely ridiculous line. I can tell you that when we were sitting around a room many years ago at DDS, thinking about what the roles of an independent facilitator could be, we very specifically talked about providing advocacy at both IPPs and at fair hearings. We very specifically talked about that. So that was the intent. The problem is nowadays to get DDS to create sort of a decision about anything, it's like pulling teeth. This is an issue that I have brought up to DDS already. I know you have probably brought it up too, who asked the question. And I am really impatient in trying to get them to provide an answer because, the whole point is that a facilitator is there for you so that you're not going into these situations by yourself. They're there as your support from the beginning of a person-centered plan to the end of when you start in the self-determination program. So I really hope that that we can make this happen.
Thank you, Judy. I have an anonymous question asking for clarification on the difference between ILS services and SLS. I thought SLS is to train someone, not to live with their parents, this person says.
No, ILS stands for Independent Living Services. And historically, it was what you just talked about. Historically, it was that you had to be intending to move out from your family's home within a certain period of time, I think maybe 18 months or something like that. And that you could that very few people, particularly people of color who were never intending to move out of their home, never got access to ILS services. Well, amazingly, DRC sued over that and won. And now ILS services should be provided to any adult who wants to be able to gain those living skills like cooking and chores and all those kinds of shopping, all those kinds of skills one needs to be more independent in their home, whether their home is with their family or whether their home is outside of their family home. Supported living services is different though. Supported living services is when you leave your family home. You usually live in your own place. You might have roommates, but it is the support staff that help you up to 24 hours a day to be and spend the night at your place to be able to support you, to ensure that you have good health and that you're safe and that you are able to live in the community like you want to.
Thank you, Judy. I have a question asking about what SDP budgets can be used for. If I'm a self-determination program participant, can I use my money to be in a bowling league?
Yes, you definitely can. That is actually an excellent way to spend your money. My son has a budget line item to be part of a drum circle. So it's like any kind of community activity that is fully in the community, you can spend your money on. Okay.
I have another question asking if I'm a self-advocate and I'm interested in camping, can camping only be used with self-determination?
Can camping only be used in self-determination? No. As I was saying at the beginning, things have changed and now camping can be paid for in the traditional system. It used to be before 2009, it was allowed, and then it went away for many years because of budget cuts. And in the budget that was just passed 2 weeks ago, it now is back in the traditional system. Okay. And certainly in the self-determination program, you can definitely pay for camping. But remember that it can't be a segregated camp. It can't be a camp just for children or adults with disabilities. It has to be a camp that all children and adults have access to.
Thank you, Judy. I have one of your favorite frequent flyer questions. Say that 5 times fast. For community integration, can a regional center pay for something like a Disneyland ticket?
Yeah, that is a question we get a lot. I believe you should be able to, if in fact it meets one of your goals that have been stated in the IPP. So remember, you start with the person-centered plan, and that informs your IPP. Not everything that is in your person-centered plan ends up as a goal in your IPP. For example, in my son's first person-centered plan, one of his goals was to be with his grandpa, to spend more time with his grandpa. That did not end up being a goal in his IPP. You could understand why. But the goals that end up in your IPP are the goals that are traditionally those kinds of things that regional centers help people do. So they are socialization, they are issues around employment, living in the community, inclusion, all those kinds of things that are, and respite and all those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of goals that end up in your IPP. So you can't just say, okay, my goals are to have fun at Disneyland, and therefore I want to put it in my spending plan, because that's not the kind of goal that regional centers, which are government funded. Remember that they're quasi-governmental agencies. And so they're going to say, we cannot fund Disneyland because that's just a fun activity that you want to have. But if your goal is that you are part of a group that socializes and goes together to Disneyland, and it is your way to make friends and be part of a community, and so your goals in your IPP are, making friends and being part of a community program, I think that is a very legitimate case for Disneyland. Okay, that's a very legitimate case. But if you're going to Disneyland with like your family, like once in a year, and you want that $200 ticket to be paid for, honestly, you're going to have a harder case to make. So always think about what your IPP goals are. They need to be very specific and related to everything in your spending plan.
Thank you, Judy. For what I'm sure is going to be close to our last question, I'm going to ask whichever Spanish interpreter is voicing, whether that's Jose or whether that's Annabella, to translate for us the text that I have just sent in the chat. Folks, please hold your questions until our interpreter is able to translate this question.
So as you were doing that, please, Jose, I just want to get a question from Facebook that just came in, which is, how would I go about changing FMS companies? You have every right to change your FMS company. You just want to make sure you're making it happen kind of at the first of the month. Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much, Jose. In case you were not on the English channel, you would not have heard Jose interpret this, but this is a question I've heard. I don't know if it's happening at more than one regional center. I know for sure it's happening at Valley Mountain Regional Center, that they are saying, if you want to go into the self-determination program, you have to wait until your annual IPP in the month of your birth. That means if you're born in June, you have to wait a year to go into the program. That is not true. That is not following the law. People should be able to go into the program whenever they want. I have brought this issue up to the executive director of Valley Mountain Regional Center. I've also brought it up to DDS. I'm really hoping that this gets taken care of soon. The other thing you should know is that the Land Urban Act allows you to ask for an IPP at any time. Anytime you get an IPP. If you're in the middle of a crisis, if your circumstances have changed, they can't say, oh, we need to wait until you're the month of your birth. Good luck on your crisis. So of course you can ask for an IPP at any time. So please be very insistent on that. So I believe that we're going to have to end. What an amazing turnout today, everybody. I think we'll probably come back next week. Let me make sure before I make any promises, because we had to cancel one because I forgot I was going to be in New York for last week's one, because I was seeing Bruce Springsteen on Broadway, people, which is certainly the priority. That is me being self-determined, because that was more important to me. So yes, we will be having STP Connect next week, because we need to make sure that all these questions get answered, and we're getting such huge turnouts. It's really awesome. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to Helen, our new interpreter, and to our substitute interpreters for the day, Jose and Annabella. We really, really appreciate. I tried really hard to talk slowly. I don't know if I succeeded. Okay, Jose said I was good. 2 thumbs up. And Helen said I'm good. Okay, yay. My mother would be happy, who always said I talk too fast. So thanks, everybody. And we will see you all next week. Have a great week. Bye-bye.